Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So this episode I'm calling The Ruling Triad in the U.S. Hypercapitalism, Crony Capitalism, and Corporate Oligarchy. So I am, this is the occasion for this. There's a couple of different things. One is that I've been thinking about the shifts in COVID policy relative to the Omicron variant, but also just in general, how both political parties have been attacking or addressing various social issues, and mostly also involved with labor, in other words, with working people, and how to basically manage the economy, not stated as such sometimes, but implied often in the way policy is made. And so, but we see people really starkly in general with the pandemic, but particularly recently, how little valued workers are, and how little valued people are, just in general, our whole being. And I don't want to reduce everything to labor, but labor is an important, because most people work for a living, and so that's where their income comes from, so forth and so on. That and it's something they spend at least a third of their time at, often or more, and it comes to represent in a way how we are overall treated as people in our society. In other words, what are the values of our society and our political economy? And currently what we're seeing is that the value of human life is very little in the United States, and the value of work is so. I mean, we have a nice equation there, and we can see, and workers are responding, and labor unions are responding to this by striking or trying to push for more protections. And I mean, sometimes not enough, and not enough to actually to change the policy, or let's say to date, but still we see how both political parties, both the good cop and the bad cop of U.S. politics, in other words, the good cop being the Democratic Party and the bad cop being the Republican Party, that both players are united, okay, to some degree, in their attitude toward workers and toward people. Even though the Democrats do talk a different game. In other words, they talk as if they care, and this is where they function, in my view, as a containment vessel for popular discontent by simply addressing superficially, or being, in some sense, the leftward stopper of the political spectrum, or the Overton window, the leftward jam of the Overton window, but to keeping that jam far to the right, or let's say if left and right, if we think of left being concerned for workers, and again, left and right sometimes don't work out so well as a description of politics. But anyway, so this concept that I'm putting out there is that I think that there's this triad, maybe it's a tetrad, okay? Maybe there's another term that I'm missing in my constellation of different factors in U.S. Society, in our political economy. So political economy being a nice descriptor of both an economy and politics and how they work together, and that's a better and more accurate picture of what economies are in general, because they all depend on governments to do things to support the economy in different ways. But anyway, so hypercapitalism is a concept that I sort of brought up in a recent video, and I think it describes, so that's number one. So hypercapitalism is really an ideology more than anything else. There's no realization of hypercapitalism in reality. But what hypercapitalism is, it's kind of the libertarian fantasy of a market that takes care of itself, that people don't need really the support of government. They don't need government to help them, and businesses for that matter are supposedly don't need that either. That it's really markets will somehow take care of themselves, that people will find the solutions, and by trucking and bartering with each other, and by selling their labor and so forth and so on. And so and in this vision also, labor unions and organization is an interference in this process of bargaining between different economic actors in this idealized market. So in the United States, this idea of hypercapitalism is that it's the idea that a regulated capitalism is not desirable, that in fact we want this sort of free-for-all. And this is evoked by the response to the pandemic recently, or the slight change in direction, as basically both Democrats and Republicans are saying, we can't do any more public health, really. We can wait for new vaccines and so forth and so on. We hope you get vaccinated, but basically, we can't really do any more quarantining, more, basically lockdowns, or regulation of hours of certain businesses, or just putting in public health measures. Mandates of various kinds, pressing hard for mandates. Now, the Biden administration put out some very weak mandates, and this were now struck down today by the Supreme Court. So we have an environment where this hyper-capitalist ideology is promoted. But anyway, there's an ethos, of not caring. In other words, that government is not caring about people and about their health in this case, but also about other things, their education, or they're playing, in this case, health versus education, and basically, but neither gets served, in reality, because too many people are sick right now with the Omicron surge. So anyway, hypercapitalism is number one on this triad, and number two is crony capitalism. So I'm saying hypercapitalism is really an ideology to sort of constantly throw at the efforts to build a social democracy in the United States, the efforts to build an adequate social safety net, an adequate welfare state of some kind, adequate regulation of businesses and so forth and so on. And that hypercapitalism is this ideology that says, no, we can do it. Businesses need to have the freedom, and individuals need to have the freedom to just to do whatever, and we can't rely on government. So, and this is unified now. It seems as though the Democrats, the right-leaning, the center-right to right-wing, but not far right-wing leadership of the Democratic Party is pretty much in agreement with the Republican Party on this right now. And so anyway, but crony capitalism is the reality, of our economy, in that because in some sense there's a basically white collar crime, corruption, so forth and so on, is largely legalized in the United States, that we have a system of crony capitalism. Now, we're not unique in having crony capitalist system, that there are more corrupt economies, more corrupt systems in the world, not so much in the developed world, not in so much in Western Europe, or in actually most of Europe, and also in the southern cone, for instance, of Latin America now. In economies which have turned a corner and that there's that basically crony capitalism means that that basically the deals are given out and by connection and by graft of various kinds or by bribery and so forth and so on. And so we have because we have a government that's captured by corporations, and that the capitalism or the form of capitalism that we have is not a one that's the idealized free market that the hypercapitalists sort of talk about, but it's really one where the already powerful buy their way to more success or to more subsidy or to more favorable treatment by government. Now, that's not the only formula to success in business. There are other factors, obviously, in becoming successful, in acquiring, in growing a company, in increasing one's revenue, increasing one's profits, so forth and so on. But the ingredient that which is becoming more apparent is that we have a crony capitalist society, and so this creates, or certainly government is captured and is being used as a tool by many businesses or by business in general, but particularly the larger businesses to enrich the corporations and the stockholders, the investors in those corporations, and at the expense of consumers, at the expense of workers. Okay, and then finally, the third term I'm saying is corporate oligarchy, which is, I already touched on it. But anyway, if the economy is running as a crony capitalist economy, you have behind it a corporate oligarchy. You can call it the donor class or corporatist oligarchy that is managing, or through the state, the economy, or through managing for its own interests, basically, and creating, often now in our financialized economy, creating Ponzi circuits of wealth accumulation. In other words, creating a false circuit where the increasingly asset values inflate, bubbles of either stocks or real estate inflate, and in divorced from the whole real economy, in other words, and the real value that might be created. So it's not entirely financialized. It's not entirely Ponzi in this, or a Ponzi circuit. But anyway, so this corporate oligarchy are sort of this is the ruling class. This is the people who are calling the shots and are telling politicians really what to do and are giving them their marching orders. And we see with the inconsistencies, or the sort of the kind of yo-yo, or ping pong course of the 1 year old Biden administration, that they are basically, they're getting these signals and they're just responding and they're just taking orders. They seem to be just taking orders from corporate oligarchs, from people who are the major donors, who are often lobbyists or are very large billionaires or corporate entities that are, or not, or corporate PACs that have certain demands, of certain, if sometimes stated subtly, sometimes stated openly, and also, but just these politicians have been, bred to already respond to these. They don't. It's not like they're suddenly getting a new a new order that they just don't understand. That it's ongoing relationships that have accumulated over many decades. That and these politicians have grown up in a system where they are groomed to serve corporate rule. So anyway, so I think that I'm putting this out there as a kind of, this is a you know, a prelude, or you know, a preface to more videos that talk about how basically more on the ground level, how this prospect of a political system that seems united against working people and against ordinary people, despite the good cop bad cop game that is being played, that needs to be paid attention to. In other words, the courtship of voters by various means, and the confusion of voters and of the people by various means. That system basically, we need to understand the sort of the kind of the overall architecture of what's behind this sense that basically we're on our own. Okay, we don't have a government that is really paying attention to our needs, and so I wanted to talk about this triad because it's hypercapitalism for us, but crony capitalism, or sometimes people say socialism for the rich, which is, you know, kind of a little bit of a bastardization of the idea of socialism. But so this hyper-capitalist, hyper-competitive ideology, and for ordinary people who really don't have the means to, you know, often to compete on, you know, in the way that this ideology, but so people are constantly failing, so it creates an atmosphere where people fail, and in particular in the pandemic, literally people are getting sick, which is not the same thing as failing, but they're put in a catch-22 situation where they where they don't have the resources and not given the resources to cope with this disease, this pandemic, and it exposes the cracks in our system. So this is not simply a product of the pandemic, but the pandemic has opened the curtain, and we see the structure of what I'm calling this triad of hyper-capitalist ideology, crony capitalist reality, and then a corporate oligarchy that is the organizing, not necessarily organizing in a way where they can just sort of plan it out, but that they, and in a way, you know, labor activism, you know, on grassroots activism, also, you know, politicians occasionally, you know, throwing a wrench in the works, you know, progressive politicians occasionally being able to, you know, again, I wish they would do that more, and they could act more as leaders in the way of a movement, that we really need a movement of people who are pressing government to serve the people. But anyway, right now, that's not happening. So anyway, so I just want to put this out there as a idea, and there could be better ways to phrase this, and to, but I wanted to keep the conversation at least on both on sort of big picture ideas, but ones that really can describe our current reality. We get down into the nuts and bolts, and so that they're matching reality. And I think that just also, I think to distinguish between different types of capitalism helps, rather than just to say there's a socialism capitalism contrast or a social democracy capitalism contrast. That I think that you can see a shading. I think, you know, what I'm driving at is that, at least conceivably in what's existed before, some kind of strong social democratic society is potentially where we could end up if we are lucky, or not just lucky, if we fight hard, we struggle hard, and we're able to outmaneuver the and politically defeat the minions of the corporate oligarchy, and basically able to disperse the corporate oligarchy, and to basically have it submit to popular will, rather than right now it's the reverse. We are submitting to the corporate oligarchy. Anyway, so if you have alternative ways to talk about this, or just to want to react to the content of this video, please comment below. If you like it, please like it, and also please subscribe to my channel. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.